Right. I'll start this by verbs, since you three lost some classes. I'll do a very quick review of what I have been telling the people about verbs. Okay. So verbs can be split into two big categories: lexical verbs and auxiliaries. Okay. And in the first, lexical and auxiliaries. Okay. Uh, What is the difference? Well, when we talk about auxiliary verbs, you know by exclusion what lexical verbs mean. But I can advance to you that what we call lexical verbs is what you, when you are teaching, call the principal verb uh, in some constructions. Okay, especially in those in which we have two or more verbs. Well, verbs, the lexical verbs, have inflection. Okay, it means that in the past tense they receive ed, that they have to agree in tense, in number. Okay, so they have a number of inflectional forms that are permitted. Okay, for example, the present takes. Okay, uh, can occur after the verb of a canonical clause, whereas the past participle taken cannot. Okay, I cannot say I can say she takes care, but not she taken care. And why not? Because I need an auxiliary verb. Okay? I'll go through this very quickly because this was the topic of the last two classes. And we have some verb forms and verb shapes. And please don't make confusion, because form and shape, we traditionally treat them as synonyms, but they are not in the case of syntax. Okay, so we have six inflectional forms. And what are the six inflectional forms? The preterite, that most people call the past tense, and I'll tell you why we are not opting for calling it past tense but preterite. The third singular present, the plain present, the plain form, the gerund participle, and the past participle. Okay, each of these with an example. In this case, the verb to check. The preterite checked. The third person singular checks. The plain present check. This is not the sorry. This is not this. Okay, they are different forms. Okay, the plain form check, which is also different because this is for simple present and this is for imperatives, for subjunctive. Okay, it's kind of different. The gerund participle, the ing form, the progressive, and the participle. Like, for example, I'm giving the class. This is a progressive tense. I'm giving. It's marked by the verb to be giving something. Or people who are attending this class are very smart. In this who are attending this class, I have a kind of adjective function restricting the meaning of the word people. Okay, so in this case it's a participle. That's why we group gerund participle. And the past participle, which is also given by a final ed, but we have to keep in mind it's a completely different form from the preterite. Okay? Now, although we have distinguished six different inflectional forms, there are four shapes. Okay? And why is it so? Because I told you forms and shapes are completely different instances. Okay? A shape is a way you write the word. It's related to spelling, whereas a form is related to function. Okay? For example, checked and checked. Checked, simple past, and checked, past participle. They have the same shape, but they are different forms. So when I talk about forms, I talk about those very primitive verb tenses, the simple tenses, When I talk about shapes, I talk about spelling. Now, the plain form. What is the plain form? The plain form is the identical with the lexical base of the word. It's not inflected with tense. What is the plain form? Let's go back here. She may check the figures herself. You may say, oh, this check is in the present. No, it's not in the present. It's in the infinitive. So the plain form is normally what we call the infinitive without to. Okay? Now the plain present is inflected for tense. Also identical with the lexical base. To play, plain present, play, or he, she, it, plays. Usually indicates present time. And be is an exception, okay? Because the plain present normally has two different shapes. It's only one form with two different shapes. One shape for he, she, it, and one shape, sorry. No, it's a tense, sorry. The plain present is a tense with two different forms, okay? One for he, she, it, another one for all the other pronouns. The exception is be, in which we have three different forms. Take a look. Third person singular present. It's a form. Plain present. It's another form. For the same verb tense, simple present. Okay? This is exactly the question people asked me. Oh, because I said we have two forms for tense, verb, flexional forms. He, she, another one for all the other pronouns. And people ask me, okay, but what about is a bit of an exception to be is neither a lexical verb nor an auxiliary verb. So what the hell is be? Be is what we call copula, a verb that auxiliary of its own. It's the only verb in the sentence, or it can be the only verb in the sentence, and it works as if it were its own auxiliary. Okay, so that's why we call it copula, because it accumulates the function of auxiliary and main verb. So by shape, we mean the spelling or pronunciation, and thus the preterite and past participle of the lexeme check have the same shape, as it happens for the plain present tense and the plain form. This is true for all regular verbs, okay? The plain present and the plain form will always match, but that does not mean they are the same form. They are only the same shape, okay? It's a discussion similar to that one we had with morphs and allophonics, okay, and homophones. So, there is a good number of regular verbs where the preterite and past participle do not have the same. Can you mention one case? Number of irregular verbs in which the preterite and the past participle don't match. They are not the same. Drink, drink, drank, drunk. Okay, so, or eat, eat, ate, eaten. Okay, they don't match. All regular verbs will match, but some irregular verbs don't. So it is a proof, it is an evidence that we are talking about different forms. Okay? Take a look at the verb to take. The preterite is she took the message. But the past participle is the message was taken by her. So it's very easy to decide whether any particular instance of the shape check is a preterite or a past participle. Substitute it for an irregular verb which has these three different instances. And depending on the case of occurrence of this irregular verb, you will be able to distinguish. Okay? For example, consider this example. She may have checked the figures herself. Well, is this past participle or preterite? I don't know. I know you know, but let's imagine we don't know. We'll change this verb to check by take, for example. She may have message the or she may have taken. So this is a past participle form. When I put taken there, it shows that we're talking past participle. I'm not sure whether she checked the figures herself or not. And now, what kind of a verb can it? Simple past, participle. Put take instead. I'm not sure whether she took the figures herself or not. So, preterite, okay, and not past participle. So let's talk about the 6 verb forms and their functions, okay, and how to distinguish them. The preterite is coincident with the simplest type of past, yeah, the past tense. And it's marked inflectionally rather than by means of an auxiliary verb. This is true for sentences, canonical clauses, remember? Okay, not talking about interrogatives and negatives. Many grammars use the more general term past tense, but we prefer to use preterite form to distinguish from the construction in which we have, for example, those auxiliaries like have, checked, okay, because it's also called present perfect. So let's read to avoid confusion. The present tense forms, as you can see, they are 2. Okay, one for third person singular, marked by an S, ES, IES, OES, and so on, and another one for all the other pronouns. What is the exception? B. Okay, B is an exception for those. Okay. It's always identical with the base of the lexeme. I have to tell you this, okay? The case in which it's not third person singular, the other case is identical with the lexical base of the morpheme, which means what people usually call infinitive without to. But in fact, we are talking about the plain present form, okay? The plain form is also identical with the base. It's also called sometimes infinitive without to. But it's not a present tense. Okay? It's used in 3 constructions. Imperatives, infinitival, and the subjunctive. Imperatives, like check the figures yourself. Do it now. Be quiet. As you can see, there is an implicit you to whom I talk to. E colocação pronominal. There is an implicit you. I. For example, you be quiet. This is what is implicit in the imperative. Okay, there is always an implicit you. And if you compare with the simple present, you see the difference. You are quiet. This is a declarative sentence. Be quiet. It's an imperative. The infinitival, it's better myself. I will check than myself. As you can see, it happens twice in this sentence. Okay? First one, after it's better to. The second one, after will. In both cases, it's the infinitival. And finally, the subjunctive. Subjunctive. Yes, Paulo. Everything that is the base of the lexeme and that is not present. Okay, that's not simple present. Okay, so all the other uses that we normally tell our students after the modal verbs, you use the infinitive without to. You use the infinitival. Okay, it's the so-called infinitive without to. Now, in the subjunctive, in its essential that she checked the figures herself. Okay, we have also the use of the infinitive, normally preceded by the that. Okay, it's essential that you be ready on time. Okay, uh, I ask them to do their labor for tomorrow. Okay, all these verbs for the to action are subjunctive. The infinitive often marked, but it's also found uh, after such verbs as can, may, will, do, make. Okay, because these verbs are what we call the, with the exception of make, yeah, and do, the anomalous verbs, yeah, the modal verbs. Okay, and they require infinitival after them. Okay, do and make and have. Okay, they will work as auxiliaries. For example, in make, when you make someone do something for you, I made them carry the loudspeaker. Okay, or it's different, for example, from the construction, I had them carry the loudspeaker for me. In both cases, there is infinitive. One of them, I made them carry. There is no to. I had them to do it. I had them to carry the loudspeaker. There is the to. Okay? As you already know, to make someone do something involves almost a kind of how can I say this? To make someone do something involves convincing, whereas to have someone do something involves using of relation a power relationship in which the other person is almost unable to say no. Okay, you know this construction. It's just parenthesis. Playing again. I think it's a problem with the animations. No, it's not a problem with the animations. There are two factors that distinguish the plain form from plain. One of the cases is B. So when you are confused, try to imagine the situation with the verb be. Okay, be has present of the usual. Yeah, am, is, are, and all of these are shaped on the plain form. Be plain present is, am, are. This is the difference in plain form and play present. Plain present. And that's why I told you plain form is everything else that is not simple present. Okay. The plain present of be, the plain present form, appears in three constructions. quiet. It's better safe than sorry. In quiet, we have an imperative. It's better to be safe than sorry. I will be ready in time. They are both cases of if it is that she be told about this. In this case, affirmative. Okay, the verb is part of a noun phrase, for example, that plays the role of the object. In the case of a subjunctive. Present plain form is essential. He be told. It's essential to be told. It's essential that we be told. Now, if I have plain present, there must be an agreement with the third person, and in the case of be, also with the first person. Okay. Whereas the plain form does not take inflection. Inflection in plain form. That's why it's plain. She checks the figure herself is okay, but we have the ungrammatical she check the figures herself. What kind of a form is this? Plain form or plain present? Plain? Plain present, the first one. Take a look at the second one. She will check the figures herself. Not she will checks. What form is this? Plain form or plain present? The second one is plain form, because this agreement here is ungrammatical. Okay, this asterisk means ungrammatical. So when I don't need this third person singular agreement, it's because I have plain form, right? That's I and form is everything that is not simple present, and that is identical with the base of the verb. Okay? Cool. This form always ends ing. This is not new for you. Okay? The traditional grammar distinguishes between gerund and the present participle. We'll group them. Okay? We'll group them just to make it easier for us. Take the case of the gerund. Walking late at night can be dangerous. This gerund, uh, it, it's progressive action. Now, if you people must be careful, and if we split subject predicate here, walking late at night must be careful. Subject, people, just this. People walking late at night. Okay, this is the subject. Must be careful is the predicate, because here in must we have the predicator. We have the action, let's call it, let's put it this way. Okay? So people walking late at night. What is the function of walking late at night in relation to people? In the universe of people, I'm talking about only those who are walking late at night. So it has a kind of adjective function. It refers back to the subject to restrict its meaning. And that's why I say it's a present participle, I'm sorry, because they are participating in the action of walking late at night. Okay? So which of the two is the classic present continuous? Number one. Yeah, walking late at night can be dangerous. Although the present continuous is defined as the present of be and the progressive of the other verb. Where is the present of be? It's not there, but it's implicit that there are some people walking late at night. Okay? The classic present continuous, in fact, is to be plus verb plus ing. Okay, because it's present of to be, continuous of the second verb. All this naming for verb tenses has a reason. Yeah, I gave you some examples last class about future. We deduced the future perfect continuous just by knowing the three basic verb tenses, the three simple verb tenses: simple present, simple past, future. Okay, and notions of the participle. If you know these four uh, verb forms, you know how to form complex verb tenses. So a better explanation is that a gerund is comparable to a noun. This, walking late at night. This can be dangerous. Okay. Whereas present participle is comparable. Sorry. A gerund is comparable to a noun, while participle is comparable to an adjective. People walking late at night. Walking late at night, going back to compare, to restrict the meaning of people. By the way, I think it was Juliana who asked the question last class about the case of B. Yeah. Yes, B has. We were talking about shapes and forms. Yeah. B has two forms. Sorry, all the verbs in the present have two forms: the third person and the regular form. B has three. Okay, I researched about this. B is what they call an exception because B is not really a lexical verb. We are talking about lexical verbs, and B is lexical and auxiliary at the same time. So B is treated differently. It's a case which we call copula. Okay, it plays two roles in the sentence. We'll talk about this later. Okay. The past participle is used in two main constructions: the perfect and the passive. The perfect being marked by the presence of the verb to have, and the participle being recognizable by the presence of the verb be. Okay, both of them agreeing with person. Okay, so the perfect is a past tense marked by the auxiliary have, and the passive involves the auxiliary verb be. Okay, the term past participle, we retain the term past participle, though the past component of meaning applies just to the perfect construction, okay, and not to the participle itself. Okay, it is called past participle because it helps us build a verb tense that talks about the past. Okay, but it it will not always talk about a past situation. For example, this class is being attended by you. This is not past. This is not past. This is present. So why calling it past participle? I don't know. The answer is I don't know. But the probability, maybe I can explain this because the abundance of using this in past tenses is higher than to use it to describe the present. Okay. So these are the lexical verbs. Okay, the lexical verbs. Now we've got to talk about the auxiliary verbs. So remember, we have what is important for the moment is the difference between form and shape. Form is related to function, to those primitive tenses, primitive verb tenses like preterite, the present, the two shapes of the present, third person, and all the others. The gerund participle. What else? Present, preterite, present plain and plain present and plain form. The plain form, the so-called infinitive without to. Okay, and shape is related to spelling. So the same verb form normally has two different shapes. One for he, she, it. Another one for the other verbs. Exception B. It has three shapes. Okay. Well, auxiliary verbs have a kind of different behavior from the verbs we were talking about minutes ago. Auxiliaries can be either modal or non-modal. Now, what does that mean? To define modal so that you can distinguish the modal verbs are the so-called, some people call them anomalous verbs, and then they include B in the category. Modal verbs are used to modalize the scene. And I to modalize your uh, your text. Unicorns are this. People will ask, what kind of a hemp have you smoked to see blue unicorns? Unicorns are blue. Looks like it's true. It's unquestionable. What can I do to modelize it? To decrease the degree of assertiveness. Unicorns can be blue, should be blue. So verbs are called models because they have the ability to modelize the clause. Can, may, must, will, shall, ought to, need, dare. And their past tenses could, might, would, should, and the preterite forms, which are the preterite forms of can, may, will, etc. Okay? So all these verbs here are modal. And be, have, and do are non-modal. So I'd say in this case, you'd better memorize the exception and then you get the rule. Yeah, be, have, and do are kind of different. The others that are auxiliary verbs are modal. Okay, so what is the best route to reflect about auxiliary verbs? All auxiliary verbs invert in questions. Okay, it's a kind of a hint for you to know what an auxiliary verb is. All auxiliary verbs in a sentence, when they happen, they take not in negatives. Because it's their role to do that. They are auxiliaries. They are there to help. To help who? To help the principal verb. Okay, so they will take the not, they will be inverted with the subject. Always. Okay? I normally tell my students in inglês instrumental, em terra de principal, quem trabalha é o auxiliar. Né? Então, é basicamente isso. Ok? So the usage of these verbs, the two most frequent situations involve the inversion and negation. Okay, so if I ask you, give a definition of auxiliary verbs that play the role of, they take the responsibility for being inverted with the subject in questions and receiving the negative in negative sentences. Seen that clauses, the subject always precedes the verb. And in most interrogative main clauses, the subject follows the first verb. This first verb that precedes the subject must be an auxiliary verb. Only auxiliaries can invert with the subject. I can never. Take a look at this. She taken the car. Has she taken the car? I cannot say taken she has the car. It's ungrammatical. Yeah. So this is an evidence that have is an auxiliary verb. Take a look at B. She took the car, the declarative. Took she the car? What is the problem with this? Why is it ungrammatical? What is the grammatical? Huh? Compare A and A. Because here I have an explicit auxiliary verb in the declarative. The declarative sentence has an auxiliary verb. It was just inverted. What's the problem with B? She took the car. Where's the auxiliary verb? It's hidden. It's not there. We cannot see the auxiliary verb unless we emphasize the action of taking the car. She did take the car. Remember this when we want to give emphasis for our declarative sentence. She took the car. Okay, she took the car, it's just the information. Now, when I want to emphasize that this really happened, she did take the car. And now, I can construct the grammatical for this. What is the grammatical question for she took the car? Did she take the car? So, took she the car is completely ungrammatical. It's just here to show that whereas this inversion is possible because the auxiliary here is marked, here the first step I have to do in B, the first thing I have to do is make the auxiliary to be visible. It's not visible. Okay? So I have to do like Chaves. I have to paint it with ink so I turn the invisible word visible. If the declarative does not contain an auxiliary, as in 1b, it is necessary to insert the auxiliary do. That version apply. The auxiliary do, also known as did. Yeah, many people have a way to approach do, did, does, as if they were three different instances. In fact, they are only one instance. They are do. Yeah, do and its past, do and its third person singular form. Yeah, and students get sometimes confused because of this. Well, if you are doing an exercise on simple past, does must not appear. Yeah, did must be there. If you are doing simple present, you are expected to work with do and does. And what is does? Does is the necessary implication of the fact that verbs ending in O receive ES in third person singular. It's do for third person singular. People think do and does are two different instances, two kind of alien entity. So do is inserted simply to satisfy the rule. Now disagree a bit with this. I have to consider the fact of the emphasis. It's not just to satisfy the rule. It's hidden. For me, your material says it's just to satisfy the rule, but for me, do is hidden. Do is always there. There's always a did here. Sempre está aqui o homem invisível torcendo o braço do seu barriga. Só que ninguém vê. Só quando joga a ênfase. Okay, so she did take the car. Now, if you take a look, putting do here, did because it's past, is not the only change we cause in that sentence. What is the other change? The verb changes. Now let me ask you about something that you have just seen 10 minutes ago. The verb changes to the plain form or to the plain present? Huh? To the plain form. Everything that happens after auxiliaries is plain form. Okay? Now, when I say she took the car, uh, let's put it in the present. She takes the car. Is it plain form or plain present? This is plain present. Plain present is when it's present. When it's not present, when it happens after auxiliaries, it's plain form, the classic infinitive without to. Okay. Now, the negative, where not is used to produce the negative effect, requires the verb to be an auxiliary. Can only be to auxiliary verbs. She has taken the car. Negative, she has not taken the car. Again, a very good evidence that the verb to have here is an auxiliary. She took the car. She took not the car? Of course not. What's the correct? She didn't take the car. Again, first I have to make do to come out. Second, I have to put do in the past because auxiliaries take the responsibility for verb tense. Third, I have to place the negative particle not just beside do. Okay. Again, if there is no auxiliary in the positive, do must be inserted. And in fact, do must appear according to my perspective. The slides are not taking my point of view of this. Okay, I'm taking the material's point of view. I'll consider both. But for me, this do is always there. Okay. Well, it will have to come out anyway, so that I can place the not. Do will come out. Take in tense, agreeing in tense, and receiving not. Auxiliaries, and only auxiliaries, never lexical verbs, have negative forms ending in the suffix n apostrophe t. Only auxiliaries can have it. Okay, and then again we have to consider be as not as an exception, as a different instance of verbs. Be is neither an auxiliary, be is neither an auxiliary nor a lexical verb, and it's both at the same time. Because I cannot say I am not, only I'm not. Although I can say you are not, he is not. Okay, so we have to consider be isolated. Uh, this is something that I really question myself about because we teach be as the very first verb. Yeah? And we teach exactly the most complicated verb in the English language as the okay. Because before everything we are doing something and we are someone. But it's hard uh, for us to understand these particularities of the verb be. Yeah, it's always behaving differently. The non-modals be, have, and do have to be dealt with by now. Okay, so if it's not be, have, and do, they are modals. If they are modals, or if they are auxiliaries, they receive not and they are inverted. And this is the point. Okay. Do. Do is used in constructions like subject auxiliary inversion and negation when required to satisfy, congratulations Joshua, when required to satisfy the requirement. When required to satisfy the construction, required for the requirement is fantastic. Yeah. Redundância nada, né? That's okay. That happens. Yes, Paulo? Yeah, the Jones page, yeah. Okay, do is used in constructions that take the subject auxiliary inversion when required to satisfy the construction uh, that don't contain an auxiliary. Sorry, I have to redo it again. Much better. Much better. Yeah? There is also a lexical verb do. And what should I do when I have two do's? This is the problem. This is the problem not for you because you are fluent in the language, but for most students, and you will probably remember your basic levels of English. It's hard to accept do and do in the sentence. Yeah. So we'll have to treat the situations with two do's. One do that's the auxiliary, another do that's lexical. Okay. Um, so there is also a lexical verb do used in clauses like she did her best or I did him an injustice. Here, the auxiliary do must be added to form interrogatives. Did she do her best? And I didn't do him an injustice. As you can see, the lexical do does not take any inflection. The auxiliary do will take all the possible inflections for negative and in fact negative is not an inflection, it's a case of joining words. Okay, for tense, for example, becoming a did. B has three uses that can be distinguished. B can be used as a progressive marker associated with the gerund participle ing. Okay, as in they are watching TV or they have been working. I have been working all morning. Okay, are and being here are marking a second verb that is to come ending in ing, a progressive. A passive marker, as I told you, um, you are listening to me. Okay, so this class is being attended. Okay, it was taken by Jill, or he may be arrested. In both cases, it is a passive marker. And a case of copula. She was a friend of his, and that is very likely. Now, what is copula? Is when be is the auxiliary of its own. I am a teacher. Are you a teacher? Who is inverted? Be. Who is the principal verb? Be. So it joins two functions, auxiliary and main verb. When I have this situation and it only happens with be, I have a case that I call copula. It's neither progressive marker nor passive marker. Let's take the case of progressive marker. They are watching TV or I have been working all morning. In number one, where be is followed by a verb in the gerund participle form, it is a marker of progressive aspect. It generally serves to indicate that the situation, the action, the event, the state, or whatever was, is, or will be in progress in time in question, in the time in question. So be works as a progressive marker, not in present. I am speaking to you. Last week I was speaking to you. And next week I will be speaking to you. So we have be working as a progressive marker in the three basic tenses: past, present, and future. Now let me ask you, how should we will? Is will a verb? Will? Not really a verb, not an auxiliary verb, but will is a particle that plays the role of an auxiliary for future. I normally tell my students, I'll finish this class for the moment talking about be as a progressive marker. I normally tell my students that English is a language, as we say here em Nordeste, sem futuro. É uma língua sem futuro. Se você pegar o futuro do. Só botar o fim aqui, que isso aqui já é discussão à parte. Se você